If you're doing all the right things, but still feel exhausted, disconnected, resentful in your business, your relationship, or just life in general, this episode is for you. Today, we're talking about masculine versus feminine energy, not in the simplified, throwaway, buzzwordy way that social media often frames it, but through a deeper embodied and societal lens. This isn't about gender. It's about how energy moves through your body, your business, and your leadership, and why the chronic imbalance most high-achieving women live in is draining your vitality, blocking your abundance, and slowly dimming your joy. Welcome to the Untamed Divine, the podcast helping 6- and 7-figure female leaders understand how chasing success is causing anxiety and self-doubt, and how awakening your divine feminine energy will reignite flow, abundance, and ease, making you feel excited about life again. I'm your host, Hannah O'Donovan, former overachiever to prove my worth kind of gal turned channel, nervous system specialist, and activator of the untamed divine feminine. Let's get into it. In this episode, you'll discover what masculine and feminine energy really are beyond gender roles and spiritual buzzwords, why so many female leaders are stuck in survival mode masculine energy. Hint, it's not your fault. There's something much larger at play here. And 3 signs you're operating in excess masculine energy and how to shift back into a balance with your untamed feminine power. Before we dive in today, and in case you missed it, Too Much, Not Enough is now the Untamed Divine podcast, a space to remember who you were before the world told you how to be and why embodying the untamed divine makes us better leaders as women. Feminine leadership is the revolution that we need most right now. And you can catch the full story of this rebrand and reclamation in episode 48. But back to today's business. Nature is built on balance. And when that balance tips too far in one direction, it self-corrects. We've seen this happen throughout history. And humans are nature. We, in this modern age, seem to have tried to separate ourselves from nature, but that's just not true. We are nature, and we are in a time of great rebalancing. As women and as leaders and as part of nature, we're being called forward to guide that rebalancing. How society views success in the future will look very different than it does now. So what is masculine versus feminine energy? What does it really mean beyond perhaps the surface level explanations that you might have seen online? So starting off, masculine energy is associated with structure, action, logic, doing, protection, and direction. And feminine energy is associated with intuition, flow, emotion, creation, receptivity, and being. Both are sacred and both are necessary. That is something that I want to be so abundantly clear as we dive into this conversation today. Both are necessary. It is not about replacing masculine energy with feminine energy. It is about a rebalancing. And here is the issue, and one of the reasons why a lot of people are out of balance. Because in most cases, as human beings, but especially as women, we are rewarded for masculine traits and shamed for feminine ones. That's it at its base level, which means that we either consciously or subconsciously have taken on the understanding that in order to be upstanding, accepted, contributing members of society, we need to lead with our masculine traits and tame or hide our feminine ones in order to be successful. And that is just not the case. In fact, that is a lot of what has gotten us here. And when we experience an imbalance in masculine and feminine energy, i.e. an overabundance of one or the other, that can lead to us operating from a place of wounded masculine and feminine. There is an imbalance in our greater society and has been for a while. So it is no wonder that on the individual level and the collective level, we are seeing a lot of this wounded masculine and feminine playing out in situations around us. So what does this mean? Wounded masculine, wounded feminine. Well, masculine and feminine wounding can stem from trauma, from societal conditioning, as I've mentioned, and from one's upbringing. And wounded masculine energy often manifests as a need for control, a fear of being vulnerable. And the characteristics that come from this place can be someone being rigidly analytic, emotionally unavailable, hyper competitive, overly critical, especially to oneself, and always needing to be right. Workaholism, suppressing emotions, being potentially even aggressive. And the underlying cause of the wounded masculine is disconnection from oneself that comes from a need to appear strong or successful at all costs. Does any of this sound familiar to you? I can name many high-profile leaders right now who are operating from this wounded masculine space. And if you're anything like me, then you probably recognize some of this in yourself. These are characteristics that I have certainly been caught up in from time to time. The wounded feminine energy often manifests from feeling unsafe or unworthy, leading to a loss of self-identity. So it will often show up as people-pleasing, codependency, potentially being emotionally chaotic and passive-aggressive, as well as making oneself small, self-sacrificing, manipulating to get needs met, and fear of confrontation, all stemming from a lack of self-worth and a fear of abandonment or rejection. So this wounded version of the masculine and the feminine, of which we can have both, by the way, as I'm reading through this, I'm like identifying with a lot of it. So it's not that you have just wounded masculine or just wounded feminine. Often, especially as women, we're dealing with both because we're trying to be more masculine than works with our nature. And then from that comes this imbalance, which then creates this wounded space from which we operate in the world. And healing these wounded energies is what allows us to come back into balance, because when both energies act out, they don't trust each other, and it leads to cycles of control or chaos. And the balancing of these energy leads to a place where the masculine provides safe structure and the feminine brings intuition and creativity, both of which are integral to success. So once again, this is not about if you are finding yourself more in your masculine, completely swinging all the way over to your feminine, or vice versa. It's about how do we create a balance with these energies and create a lifestyle or an approach or a belief system that allows us to remain balanced, or at least address rebalancing when needed, so that we can look at being successful in our lives, in our businesses, and our relationships from a holistic place versus a place of forcing something that isn't working. And in order to heal the wounded masculine, it's important to embrace vulnerability, to reconnect with emotions, because that's often something when we are in our wounded masculine or our hyper masculine, we are moving in such a way that we are ignoring our feelings, ignoring our emotions, and not letting them really move through us, and instead distracting ourselves with our to-do list, with our productivity, in order to not have to feel or connect with our emotions. And healing the wounded masculine also looks like learning that true strength includes surrender. It's not about always being in control and always having that tight grip on what is going to happen next. It's actually about learning how to surrender. And then healing the wounded feminine is about establishing boundaries, cultivating self-worth. How are we understanding our worth from a place internally rather than externally, and developing the ability to assert needs directly. Again, both of these things need to happen within the ecosystem in order to find that balance. And why are we seeing an imbalance, especially in female leaders? Well, I've touched on this a little bit, but there's a wider wounding in the collective because we consistently see examples of society valuing productivity over presence, which boils down to society valuing the masculine over the feminine rather than an integration of both. We've also been taught our nervous systems have become attuned to the fact that safety equals control, logic, and certainty. And quite frankly, that abandoning the body at all turns in the name of pushing forward is what we are meant to do, is the natural way, which it is not at all. Feminine traits are often labeled as irrational or emotional or weak. So, of course, we would be downplaying those feminine traits, especially in a work setting, because why would we want to be seen as irrational, emotional, or weak when we could be seen as strong, emotionless, and successful? And this leads to so many female leaders running businesses like men and then wondering why they feel so disconnected, or that sustaining what they've built feels like actually painful to their soul to consider continuing. Like, have you ever had that moment when you've created something in your life, whether that be from a place of business or from a place of relationship, and you're like, I don't know if I even want to continue this, or the thought of continuing this exhausts me? Well, that's likely because it's been built from an imbalance of masculine energy, of proving energy, of I'm worthy because look how much I can do, and ignoring the feminine side of you, which is so integral to building things sustainably. We have learned to abandon the feminine to succeed. And that's both men and women. We have all learned that. But this podcast is for my female leaders out there, so we're going to talk about it from that lens. Historically, systems of power were built by men and for men, and honestly, that continues to be the case to today. So to survive in these systems, women have had to assimilate, adopting masculine traits of drive, of logic, of action, while suppressing their feminine ones of emotion, intuition, and receptivity. And when we overadopt some traits and suppress other ones, that is inevitably going to lead us to an imbalance, which leads us to the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine expression. And so as feminine wisdom has been devalued and distorted for centuries, labeled as hysterical or unstable or unprofessional or naive, no wonder that we've adopted the masculine in an overabundance, or more accurately, the wounded masculine in an overabundance. No wonder we have felt safer acting and building from our masculine energy, because this is what we are shown as the only true path to success. And even in modern leadership culture, balance often still means performing femininity on top of a masculine foundation. So looking soft while leading hard, which is not the way women are meant to lead. Again, I do want to be really clear here. And someone shared this analogy with me once, which I just think is such a good one. Imagine that the masculine is the coffee cup and the feminine is the coffee. Both are useless without the other, right? A coffee cup without coffee is empty, and coffee without a cup just splashes onto the counter with no form or structure. We need both. As men and women, we need both. There may be times where you lean more towards your feminine energy, a little bit more towards your masculine, but it's about having both. If we are existing solely from a place of action and logic and pushing, or opposite, we are existing solely from a place of intuition and rest and receptivity, then we're not going to get very far, or at least what we create is not going to be sustainable. You need the drive, the logic, the action in conjunction with the emotion, the intuition, and the receptivity. So all of this is to say that if you are out there listening and thinking, whoa, yeah, this sounds really familiar, and I certainly feel like I have been in an overabundance of masculine or leading from traits and characteristics of wounded masculine and then from their wounded feminine, then I hope that you're hearing that this is a larger societal thing, and it is not a surprise that that may be a place from which you have chosen to build your business, or you have chosen to create your relationship, because that is somewhere I see this show up a lot, is in relationship. And I was that person. I was in a relationship for many, many years where I was in my hyper masculine and my wounded masculine and wounded feminine for sure. And I was controlling and not trusting. And I was taking all the drive and the action and not allowing myself to be in a state of receptivity, not listening to my intuition at all. And also, quite frankly, I was also building a business at that point from that place, which is not surprising because how we do one thing is how we do everything. So if you're noticing these traits in how you approach a relationship, it's also likely how you would approach building a business if you haven't already, and vice versa. If this is how you approach work or your career or building a business, then it's likely how you are going to approach building a relationship as well. And so noticing this and understanding this can help us in all areas of our lives. And so on that note, what are signs that you are operating in your excess masculine energy as a female leader? And that can be as a female leader of your household, of your relationship, of your business, of your team, whatever that looks like. So 3 signs that you're operating in your excess masculine energy. 1 is that you equate worth with productivity and struggle to rest without guilt. So you feel uneasy unless you're ticking something off the list, constantly measuring your value by what you've produced, what you've done in a day, not who you are. And why does this happen? Well, the patriarchy has taught us that value is earned through output. The 9-to-5 industrial work model, once again created by men for men, celebrates linear productivity, while feminine qualities like rest and intuition and the cyclicality are dismissed as laziness or indulgence. And as a result, many women have internalized the belief that stillness equals failure. That was a whole unraveling for me when I really understood it, because I think we do get generally on a conceptual level that like resting isn't lazy and we like hear that, but it's another thing to understand it in an embodied way. It's another thing to rest and rest without the guilt. Like you can believe the concept, but how do you actually embody the concept? Number 2 is you hide or you suppress emotion to appear professional. So you've been told directly or indirectly that expressing emotion makes you less credible. So you detach or downplay your feelings even when they hold a vital truth, even when you know that what you're expressing is the truth that maybe other people cannot see yet. But you downplay it because you're like, I must be wrong, or being passionate, being emotional about this point, about this truth makes me seem unprofessional. So I would rather appear professional than be right. And this happens because in patriarchal systems, logic is seen as superior to emotion. Rationality is coded as masculine and therefore powerful, while emotion is coded as feminine and often seen as irrational or weak. So female leaders often learn to perform emotional neutrality in order to be taken seriously, sacrificing their emotional intelligence and authenticity in the process. Have you ever had an experience where a manager, a leader, a boss, or even a friend expressed raw, vulnerable emotion with you, and it allowed you to breathe a sigh of relief that you didn't even know you needed to breathe? It allowed you to open up your chest a little bit, drop your shoulders because someone else was giving you permission, perhaps in a context where you haven't received that permission often, or if at all, to be human. Am I saying you go into work every day and you rail at your team and you let your emotions run wild and you make decisions only from a place of like your emotional highs and lows and not from a place of grounded logic? No, obviously not. Again, it's always about a balance. But in this imbalance, we have overcorrected to remove emotional intelligence almost entirely from our workplaces, so much so that we are so out of touch with how to even bring emotion into the workplace in a appropriate way that it just feels easier to leave it out entirely. Number 3, you try to do it all alone to prove your strength. God, does this one hit for me? I love to do things alone. I get such a satisfaction, like to my detriment, of being like, I did that by myself, to the point where when I call in help, which I know I need, which I know any successful leader has done, they have not built entirely on their own. They have gotten advice and support and mentorship, and they have paid for that advice, support, and mentorship, which has gotten them to where they get to. Again, I can logically understand this, but when I call in help, I have such a resistance to it because I'm like, well, that means I didn't do it all on my own. So this can look like resisting delegating, resisting receiving support, or even asking for help at all. Not because you want to, not because you like to do it all alone, but because you think you should be able to handle it all by yourself. And this happens because feminine energy is relational, communal, co-regulating. But we've been sold this strong, independent woman trope, which is disconnecting us from interdependence and reinforces a success model where needing help is shameful somehow. Many women wear self-reliance like armor, thinking it protects them from judgment when it's actually a source of deep isolation. Again, the archetype of feminine energy is about being communal, being relational, self-nurture and nurture of others, being in community that nourishes us and allows us to co-regulate, and also allows us to see things in ways that we wouldn't otherwise, allows us to strengthen our intuition and practice strengthening that intuition in a safe space. So do I blame you for having this idea that you should be able to handle it all? Absolutely not. I think if you've been listening to this episode, you understand how conditioned we are by the societal structures around us. But name me one successful person, truly successful person who has gotten there entirely on their own. You can't do it. And so if you are sitting there thinking, I am meant for big things, then this is in fact probably one of the most important beliefs that you need to heal, which is that you cannot do it all alone. And it is not shameful to ask for help. In fact, it's what really smart, savvy, successful business women do. So what's the real truth here? You were never meant to build your business or your life like a man from an overabundance of masculine energy. It's time to remember that your softness, your slowness, your sensations, your cycles, your intuition, your ability to create magic in the relational communal space, these are not liabilities. They are, in fact, extremely important leadership tools, and leadership tools that we need now more than ever. More than ever. Leading from a hyper masculine, wounded masculine space is not working. We can see that very clearly right now. And so how do you come back into balance? How do you feed your feminine energy if that's something you've been ignoring? How do you create a balancing, or perhaps feed some of your masculine energy when you are coffee without a cup? Well, my friends, nervous system devotion is the bridge back to balance. You can't just decide to be in your feminine. Actually, no, I don't wish that's how it worked, because when we are able to challenge ourselves to embody concepts, they stick with us so much more. So I don't wish you could just decide to be in your feminine and it would happen, because then you probably wouldn't stay there. You wouldn't fully understand it. But in order to balance back in your feminine, if that's what you've been experiencing is a hyper masculine approach to life, your body has to feel safe there. Your body has to be able to release the shame that comes with these more feminine traits, the conditioning that these feminine traits are weak or irrational or hysterical or crazy. Because when we are able to release the shame, that's when we're able to bring these traits more into our lives. That's when we're able to feel proud of these traits, to feel proud that we are emotional and reading the emotional temperature of the room, proud that we have gone with our intuition, which 99% of the time is the correct answer, even though we can't prove it with data and logic in the way that we're being required to in a lot of settings. Without this somatic safety, masculine energy becomes control and rigidity, and feminine energy becomes chaos and dysregulation. So when the nervous system feels tended to, when the nervous system feels safe, that's where we create space for the rebalancing, for the feminine to rise. So we've learned what masculine versus feminine energy really means. There's the structure, action, logic, doing, protection, and direction associated with masculine energy, and the intuition, flow, emotion, creation, receptivity, being associated with feminine energy. And we need both. We need that balance. But unfortunately, the imbalance comes a lot from the fact that most women are rewarded for masculine traits and shamed for feminine ones. So no wonder a lot of us experience a hyper masculine approach to work, relationship, and lives, which then leads us to operating from a place of wounded masculine and wounded feminine. That can look like a need for control, a fear of being vulnerable, being really rigid, emotionally unavailable, hyper competitive in the case of wounded masculine. And in the case of wounded feminine, it can look like feeling unsafe or unworthy, being disconnected from self, and show up as people-pleasing, codependency, emotionally chaotic, passive-aggressive, often making ourselves feel small or self-sacrificing, being afraid of confrontation, so on and so forth. And we see this imbalance. We see this learned behavior of abandoning the feminine in order to succeed because historically systems of power were built by men and for men, and they have been upheld by these masculine traits because in order to survive in these systems, we as women have had to assimilate, over-adopting masculine traits while suppressing our feminine ones, as have men as well, by the way, not just women. And so how can you tell that you have been operating in excess masculine energy as a female leader? Well, first and foremost, you equate your worth with productivity and struggle to rest without guilt. You hide or suppress emotion to appear professional, detaching or downplaying your feelings even when they hold vital and important truth, and you try to do it all alone to prove your strength. There is a shame that comes from thinking you should be able to handle it all and not realizing that you were never, ever supposed to handle it all. And as I love to talk about on this podcast, nervous system devotion is that bridge back into balance. Being able to be with ourselves in stillness, in presence, and hold ourselves when those feelings of shame, when those feelings of powerlessness come, when we want to override, being emotionally open and vulnerable, giving ourselves the time and space to self-soothe, to teach our bodies that it is in fact safe to be emotionally vulnerable with the right people at the beginning, and then you kind of build that muscle, build that practice. I'm really excited to dive into this further in another episode with you. And thank you so much for listening and continuing to trust that your deepest desires are inevitable and you deserve to be turned on by your life. It's a fucking myth that we have to suffer through. Desire over duty, baby. New episodes drop every Wednesday and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. I'll see you there, or I'll see you on another time. If anyone gets that reference, you're my best friend. Okay, bye for real now. Are you still stuck in the cycle of overdrive and feeling anxious even after trying things like meditating, journaling, and even resting? These tools only work at the level of the mind and can't create the safety your body is craving when your nervous system is dysregulated. That's where the return journey comes in. A free 5-day audio experience designed to help high-achieving women like you finally regulate your nervous system, awaken your divine feminine energy, and reconnect with the part of you that leads with flow, not force, no matter what's happening around you. In less than 15 minutes a day, you'll feel more grounded, empowered, and emotionally agile by this time next week. Find the link in the show notes.